Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we have a very special guest, and it's someone who we've been talking on and off trying to get this done. I just told our guest that last night the Houthis shot missiles, waking us up middle of the night. So it's a crazy time. But our guest today is Andrew Fox. He's a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, and he's someone who served for 16 years in the British Army, leaving the parachute regiment with the rank of major. He completed tours in Afghanistan, including one attached to the U.S. Army Special Forces, as well as further tours in Bosnia, Northern Ireland, and other places in the Middle East. And he's someone who really knows what he's talking about when looking outside at what's happening where I am. And so, Andrew, after all this time, it's such a pleasure to finally see you. Not really see you, but our viewers can see you. So it's and it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise. No, I'm glad we could get this over the line. Fantastic.
So let me start with, I guess, a very weird question. Maybe it's weird. We're talking now. I'm not sure when the episode will actually come up. So we're talking as a deal with Israel. We spoke about beforehand. We're not going to, I guess, talk about. Both of us don't have all the details in terms of what's happening behind the scenes between the negotiators, the pressures being put from outside parties on Israel and Hamas. We don't know all the details. We do know that at some point, whether now or in a month or in a week, there will be a ceasefire somewhere down the line. It could be tomorrow. It could be a week from today. We don't know. It seems close right now. And one of the things that I think, as I was preparing to talk to you, I thought about was once the ceasefire happens, camera crews will get to Gaza at some point in much bigger numbers, and they will see utter destruction in a lot of the areas. They'll see almost like World War II level destruction of like totally destroyed cities, building blocks like totally flattened, people bodies being taken out of the rubble. I'm sure the Palestinians are also very good at getting these images out there, which is one of the things that your recent paper talked about, and the way they use a lot of these horrible things in order to promote and sometimes even exaggerate. So what do you think we should think about? I guess not as Israelis, because I'm talking from Israel. We know more or less what we want to think, right? Because we're on one of the sides here. But some people who are going to be watching us in Great Britain, where you are, or in America, or anywhere else, when these images start coming out on a mass scale, what should we know when we see it?
So the first thing we're going to see is information war part 2. Now, I don't know if people in Israel have realized the impact that Hamas's information operations have had on the reputation of Israel internationally, but it's not good.
Yes.
They've been incredibly effective, and Israel haven't really fought that front in the war. There's been no counter operations from Israel that I've been able to see. And if there have been any, they haven't been any good. And the Palestinians are going to make so much yardage out of the damage in Gaza. Now, I've been to Gaza. I've been to Rafah with the IDF. I've been to Netzarim. I've seen that destruction. And even I, as a former soldier, had that initial horrified reaction. Now, I have, because I've been a soldier and I've been a student of warfare, I know that that's just what war looks like. A lot of people won't be ready for this. And when you've already got a narrative that's out there running about genocides and things like that, it's going to be brutal for Israel, I suspect. What can you do about that? That's a really good question, I think, and it cuts to the core of the problem. And what Israel should have been doing for the last couple of months is getting ahead of this problem. They've allowed Hamas to completely delete themselves from the conversation internationally. You never see any acknowledgement that there are two sides fighting in Gaza. I think most people genuinely think the IDF is just dropping bombs randomly rather than targeting
Yes.
Hamas. And there's more work can be done there to say, look, for example, here's a city block. Look how destroyed it is. Okay, go back to your targeting cells. Find out when the strikes there happened. Show what was there when you dropped the bomb. Show what fighting the ground troops had to do when they were in that segment of the city, and at least try and give people the context behind it, so that this narrative that Israel is just bombing indiscriminately can be put to bed. And the fact they haven't done that, I think, is negligent almost.
Yes. And I'll just say that one of the amazing things that I found during this whole war is that how much the government here is like, and again, you're from the outside, so you probably wouldn't want to say, but you did say it's negligent, and it is. The government, one of the things we should have known as as a political class is that people out there want to get counter narratives to what's happening here out,
Mm.
and we should have been ready. If you're going to bomb Gaza, it's not just bombing Gaza with bombs, it's also bombing the rest of the world with information, accurate information about what's happening. Not everyone is going to go into Gaza like they took you in. And so people are going to be taken into Gaza with the TikTok and with the Telegram and with all that kind of stuff, which a lot of it is being produced in a way that brings out the narrative of the other side, and no one except for people privately, which is like unbelievable that you have these groups of private Israelis and supporters who are doing this on a like volunteering or getting money from donations, but it's the government's job to present its case about what it's doing. And so I do agree with you. And I just wanted to say, and I know I told you I wouldn't talk about it. This wouldn't be the focus of our conversation, but it is important. Give us a little bit of an overview about your latest, I guess, um, a report about the casualties in Gaza. So I don't want it to be the number one issue of our conversation, but it is important to understand how much the narrative is being exploited through inflating numbers, through lying, even through all this kind of stuff. So just give us a little bit about that.
This episode is brought to you by Ayn Rand Center Israel. We meet every alternate Friday to study and discuss the philosophy of Ayn Rand, author of The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. The topics range from ethics to politics, reason versus faith, aesthetics, psychology, and much, much more. This is the only place in Israel where Ayn Rand's unique philosophy is accessible to you, and you're welcome to come learn all about it. It's a great opportunity to learn and meet really interesting people. Attendance is free, and first-timers get a free book. We meet every alternate Friday at the WeWork in Sarona Market, and we like to keep the intellectual discussion going afterwards with some great food and drinks. Click the link for more info on Ayn Rand Center Israel.
Yeah, and really the report is trying to take on the fact that this number of 45,000 is thrown around almost unqualified, and the numbers of women and children dying have been thrown around unqualified. And what the world's media has done is platform one combatant and completely ignore the other. They've completely platformed Hamas. They've completely ignored anything the IDF has to say. And in summary, our paper found a number of demographic issues with misreporting of names and ages and children listed who turned out to be adults, people listed for cancer treatment who were on those lists. And more importantly than that, looking at the numbers in real detail, we looked at by proportion who was dying, and actually it turns out it's fighting age males between 15 and 45, given that we know Hamas uses child fighters. And that's a really important statistic because it kind of changes the whole narrative of indiscriminate killing. If people who are most likely to be combatants are the ones dying, then when taken in conjunction with things like that I know about the IDF's targeting processes, because I've been to IDF targeting cells and I've seen the process and seen the rules of engagement. When you have that context and all of a sudden you see that by proportion men are the one dying the most, then certainly that changes things around a bit. And we also looked at the IDF's claim of 17,000. Actually, the workings we did, we think it's an undercount, but we didn't publish that because it's speculation. Obviously, that hasn't stopped people putting stuff in the Lancet about speculation, but we thought we were better than that and didn't want to stoop to that level.
But isn't it amazing, by the way, that all these organizations that in the past year and a half, all these organizations that we thought were the Lancet, it's like the top of the top of, and they're saying, what was their count of innocent civilians that they published a report?
Speculatively, one report said 186,000. Another
even
report
the Hamas doesn't claim that, right?
Exactly, they're claiming more than Hamas. It's ludicrous. But we didn't want to stoop to that level, so we didn't. But we've gone through open source reporting, and we verified as best we can that 17,000. And I think it's notable the IDF wouldn't help us with that, so we've got our integrity intact when it comes to that. We looked at the really big claim that Hamas has always been reliable in previous conflicts, and I think this was a critical one because things like the Air Wars report are based on the assumption that these figures have been accurate in the past. And we found time after time after time, Hamas has been concealing fighter deaths, combatant deaths. And they've done it in every conflict. And both conflicts, the IDF estimate has been about right, but that's only come out months later. And in the meantime, Hamas has just been presenting totals without considering any combatants at all. And then finally, we looked at world media coverage with our partners, 50 Global, and they came up with some astonishing statistics. Like 98% of world's media is using Hamas's figures. 3% is using the IDFs, and even some of that is using it in a way that casts doubt upon their figures. Absolutely staggering that they would platform the world's number one at the moment psychotic terror group above the reports of an allied, friendly, democratic nation. It's staggering. So that's what our report uncovered. It's had great reception. We've had well over 200 million social media hits across all platforms, 20 different countries, probably more, who've covered this. But it hasn't made a huge dent, but it wasn't designed to. What it was designed to do is to give people ammunition. So when you get into the argument, you've now got this in your back pocket. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
One thing that I do wanted to ask you, and looking, it's not specifically about the report, but the difference between Hezbollah and Hamas. So during all the bombings of Hezbollah, before the pager attack, let's say, there was like back and forth aerial strikes. They would shoot missiles into the north. We would assassinate some terrorist here, terrorist there, do targeted places of people before they shoot the weapons and stuff like that. And every time Israel would kill one or two guys, or even 3 or 4, whatever it was, Hezbollah would come out with a very attractive picture, let's put it that way, AI generated of the terrorist, the dead terrorist, with his name and condolences, and acknowledging that he's a member of Hezbollah and he was killed in action fighting with the IDF. Hamas never did that. Never. They never put out names and pictures and saying we condolences. And so if you believe Hamas, not one terrorist was actually killed in Gaza. That is basically their claim, is that there's a war going on and the IDF hasn't even killed one member of Hamas, right? That's basically
Well, they've not listed any combatant status at all, and they never do. Also, they list everyone on those lists is murdered by the IDF. Now, murder is a very clear definition. It doesn't incorporate legal armed conflict. So straight away, they're claiming that it was murder, when obviously in a war setting, that crime doesn't apply to combatants. And they don't talk about the number of rockets they've fired that dropped short within Gaza. They don't talk about the killings that they themselves do. And we've seen videos of that in just the last 2 weeks to reinforce our point of them executing people in the streets. So we know they don't act in good faith. And the idea that these numbers are somehow completely reliable is ludicrous. And you know what? I'm sure once humanitarian agencies get into Gaza, they will absolutely verify Hamas's counting. I'm certain they will. Their tame NGOs will come in and say, yeah, that's absolutely correct. And obviously there's no way to verify now unless they present every single dead body. It's just ridiculous. And that's going to be another part of the information war that comes back. Oh, look, Hamas were right all along. And that's going to happen. It's going to be very frustrating for everyone involved. But, this is the age we live in. This is the first properly social media war. And it's been fought, on an 8th front to the 7 that Israel's been fighting on, and it's the one front that Israel hasn't engaged with, unfortunately, and that's certainly a lesson for Western armies going forward, and hopefully it's a lesson the IDF take forward going as well.
Do you think really that one of the things I've heard lately is that the war in Gaza was so mediatized, in a sense, not just the traditional what's called the legacy media, but over social media in a way that never was in any other conflict in the past? Is that true, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, because we've never had the technology to do what we're doing, well, what we're seeing being done in Gaza. We've never had an industry set up where faked bodies are put on camera, and I found that to be a fascinating aspect. There was that stupid headless doll that did the rounds, and I get hammered for that on social media, because I was like, that's a doll, don't be ridiculous. And people are like, but you're a monster. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it's a doll, don't be utterly stupid. I've seen airstrikes, I've seen what they do to the human body. They do not cleanly decapitate human bodies with no other damage and no blood. It's just laughable. And yet people have lapped it up. And it points to how Western societies, people believe what they see online, even when they're curated for them by a murderous terror organization. They still believe it if it's online. It's been a very depressing 15 months analyzing it with that gullibility that's on display. It's deeply frustrating, but that's the modern world, and we need to be ready to fight in that modern world. And I think Israel has shown that they're not, and I'd be very surprised if Western armies were as well.
And one thing also that thinking about it, that you have the perspective of being in war zones before, but also living in the West in a peaceful, relatively peaceful
Hmm.
society. Uh, always relative, but it seems to me, and tell me if you agree with me, that in the West, a lot of people don't really they have they want to beat the bad guys, but they refuse to accept that that entails very gruesome things. So they'll say we obviously don't want terrorists to survive, and October 7th, like normal rational people will say, is a bad thing. And but when Israel responds in a way that it's a war, like you said,
Hmm.
and you see at the first sight of any gruesome details, any innocent civilians being reported that they're dying, even regardless of the actual gruesome video, just the reports of, people are like, "Oh my god!" But
Yeah,
all wars are like that, right?
of course. I mean, look at Syria. I mean, Gaza war isn't even the deadliest war of the 21st century. Um, there's a genocide going on in Sudan as we speak.
Yemen,
Assad killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Yemen was a humanitarian crisis long before this happened. There's wars everywhere on the planet, and what they don't have supporting them is an incredibly effective online media campaign, which Hamas have done, and they've done it brilliantly. If we're being objective,
yes.
you can honestly say that Hamas have done an incredible job with their information operations, and they've suckered huge percentages of the world.
And do you think that it is because it's like nobody cares? At least it seemed to me that no one cares. Yemen has been going on for years.
Mm.
The UN in reports says there's mass starvation happening there. No one really cares about it. No one talks about it on media. There aren't really protests for Yemen. I assume not on, at least for sure, not on a large scale. And in Israel, we would say that's because they're fighting Arabs. No one cares that Arabs are killing other Arabs. Obviously, there are people that care, but not on the mass scale that we've seen. Do you get the sense that there is, from looking obviously on the outside, when you engage with people who are claiming stuff that objectively aren't true, like the Lancet saying there's hundreds of thousands of people who have been killed and things like that? Do you think it's because it's Israel and that are purported to be killing, and the dead are the Arabs?
Yeah, and I mean, yes and no. There's also a very clear dynamic in the West about the oppressor versus the oppressed, whether everything gets framed through that realist lens.
Yeah.
Um, that's that kind of critical theory is predominant in thought. And so when, Israel can no longer claim it's the underdog, probably since 1967 was the last time Israel was really the underdog. And look, I think it's a natural human reaction to be horrified when you see one army with F-35s and F-16s and one army without. But Israel didn't start this phase of the war. Nobody ever said war had to be fair, and Hamas have rightly had the absolute kicking they've deserved. But I think when you frame it in those Western critical terms of power, power dynamics and weak and strong, that's going to lead people to draw those conclusions about what's right and wrong, irrespective of whether it is or not. So I think there's that factor to consider. Secondly, I think there's the Arafat issue. His ghost is still stalking the land. He came in sort of 1964 onwards and started a very, very powerful Soviet-backed campaign that subverted huge elements of sympathetic to the Soviet Union, Western left. And that's why your Owen Joneses and your Jeremy Corbyns are so absolutely suckered in by the Palestinian cause. It's because they bought into decades of Soviet-style subversion operations, frankly. Narratives are really powerful things, and the Palestinians have had the narrative for the last, what
Yes.
we are now, 60 plus years. And all these things, when taken in conjunction, are really powerful. And then, of course, there's the fact that the information campaign Hamas have fought has targeted Western empathy. When they're talking to the Arab world, it's not dead kids and stuff. It's showing their fighters being strong, and how the Al Qassam brigades have launched an attack on the Zionist entity and killed 25
Yes.
soldiers, even though it's complete drivel. That's the narrative they're projecting, is one of strength. When they approach the West, they're projecting one that targets our empathy and tries to make us feel sympathy for them because they're the poor, weak Palestinians getting smashed up by the nasty, awful Zionists.
Yes.
And so, we've got all these narratives bubbling around, and Israel hasn't, I don't think, got a narrative that competes with that, which is a shame because there's a really strong one for Israel. You've got this brilliant, democratic, multicultural society that has Arabs on the Supreme Court who can send a prime minister to jail. And you've got a tech boom, and you've given the world huge amounts of medical treatment they would never have had before, and technology, and the fact that anyone who uses Waze is using an Israeli product when they get from point A to point B. There's a brilliant narrative about how vibrant and special Israel is as a country when you put it in the Middle East context. And yet nobody's telling that story. So
Yes.
where's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the last 16 months? They've, as I said right at the start, it's been a
Good question.
negligent performance.
One thing that is like, I have to say this because I just wrote about it, is that one of the things we have seen is the erosion of just international institutions that at least had some credibility. So the court that is now adjudicating the claim of South Africa on genocide of Israel, the ICC, I think it is. I always get mixed up. ICJ, sorry. So the chief justice of that court he's a Lebanese. He's the former UN ambassador of Lebanon to the UN, and he now wants to run to be the new president of Lebanon. And he has opened a campaign in which, in his campaign, he called Israel the enemy just now, today. And he is still presiding as the chief justice of the court that is hearing and going to decide the South African case if Israel committed genocide or not. And well, he's going to probably have to resign at some point to run officially when he opens his campaign and signs up all the, signs all the official documents. But he still, as of now, is on the court. And so today he said in an interview in one of the Arab stations in Lebanon that Israel is the enemy. It was a passing by comment, but it's like, could you imagine if you have a court case between two people and the judge says one of the plaintiffs is my enemy, and he continues staying on the court as the chief justice of the court? It's so outrageous. And we had on UN Watch and all these things, they documented, it's not the first time, but this is like unbelievable. But in the past, he said Israel is committing genocide even before the war in Gaza. He, in different, this court has used the Hamas numbers in South Africa's petition to the court. So the numbers that you just explained are ridiculous and are being manipulated and all this kind of stuff. They're being used in official courts to blame Israel, and also obviously now arrest warrants in the other court, in the ICC, arrest warrants for Israel's leaders and petitions by people. For example, Rassan Eliani is the one of the top generals, former leader of head of Golani, where I used to be in infantry. So he's now was in Italy, and a Palestinian organization asked the court to arrest him because of war crimes. And one of the reasons they keep on giving is the 40,000 number that you mentioned. They keep on giving it. They gave it in Brazil when they tried to arrest a soldier. They gave it now in Italy. And so it's like the erosion of just trust of basic institutions because of political hatred for Israel is like, do you have any comments about what I just said? Because it's so crazy.
Yeah. So here's the effect of the information war, and why Hamas, I think, with the ceasefire deal that's being discussed and presented as we talk, why I think it's such a bad deal for Israel, because Israel is going to walk away from the conflict in Gaza with Hamas still in power, and it doesn't matter who replaces them; they'll still be Hamas behind the scenes. It's not, they're not going to go away. Hamas has grown in support in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank. It has had huge international support, and it's also managed to completely corrupt international law in its favor. And I think international law, I think we can say, is dead.
Yes.
I think it's done. I mean, this war has just shown that it doesn't matter if you stick to rules of engagement and targeting processes and proportionality by the legal definition. You'll still end up in the ICJ for genocide if a malign actor wants to take you there. And we know the links between South Africa and Iran and the finances of the ANC. It's all on record. It's not a secret that this is a bought and paid for case by Iran as part of the campaign against Israel. And if you're a Western country that values the international rule of law, I mean, hell, we've got a human rights lawyer as the Prime Minister in the UK at the moment who is happy to pay billions to Mauritius to get them to take a strategic base office in the Chagos Islands. It's lunacy. And our politicians are putting this stuff on a pedestal, and our enemies have literally just spent 16 months showing us that they don't give a toss about it, and they will happily rip it to pieces if it suits their political agenda. So the best thing I think that's happened this month so far is the United States sanctioning the OSCE
Yes.
and saying that they will sanction any country that tries to arrest an Israeli leader, and that's the only way forward for me in terms of fixing this mess. Is that we stop taking these international courts seriously. We accept that the era of the rules-based order is over, and we revert to some kind of bilateral, multilateral arrangement between countries we can trust, and we no longer allow Iran to chair the Women's Rights Council or whatever it was in the UN. And we no longer allow, the Lebanese future prime minister to sit on a case where he considers one of the people in the case
Not
to be
one
his
of them,
enemy.
the Chief Justice.
There
He's
you
not
go.
just a regular guy. He's the head of it.
Yeah, so it's barking. It's absolutely barking. But I think that's one of the really sad international effects of this international information campaign Hamas have fought, is that international law is now something that we can consider optional, quite frankly, and that's a really sad place to be, because it's been a bulwark of international relations for 50, 60 plus years now.
And Andrew, one of the things that in the report, but I want to ask you personally, when you go on media and you speak, and you've been you're a leading voice on these issues even before the war here, and when you go onto these news sites that are objective, quote unquote, and they throw out Hamas numbers, let's say, or Hamas even just talking points that are regurgitated from Hamas propaganda and stuff like that. Do you think it's because they're ignorant? This is more of like it's not a factual answer, but like how do you when you go out, what do you think it's coming from? Where is the motivation behind this like regurgitating of just the Hamas perspective?
Well, it's partly from a position of ignorance. I mean, this is an exceptionally difficult part of the world to properly understand. And I'm someone that's written my master's dissertation. I did 26,000 words on this region, and even now I find wheels within wheels that catch me out, because that's just the nature of the Middle East. It's really difficult, and if you're not a specialist and you're just a generalist in current affairs, then actually this is really difficult to get around. And in psychology, we have something called inescapable worldviews, and everything that goes into making you as a human being is going to give you a certain way that you look at the world.
Yes.
And the way you interpret information is going to be heavily influenced by your worldview. So if someone has a worldview that leans towards being maybe an Arabist, or being someone who sees that paradigm I was talking about of weak versus strong, and frames the world in terms of power dynamics, then you're obviously going to start leaning one way. And we have a powerful number of biases in our brains that lead us to appreciate information that confirms what we already think, and disregard stuff that might challenge us or make us change our minds. That's just how human psychology is put together. And if all these factors come into play when it comes to trying to make up your mind. And then there's of course the fact that it's very hard to take a balanced line on this conflict. I've tried very hard to do that. I've been critical of huge amounts of things the IDF have done, from both tactical and operational perspectives. We can't turn a blind eye to what happened in the prison in Israel. We can't turn a blind eye to Israeli soldiers taking their mobile phones into Gaza and
Yes.
making buffoons of themselves and putting it on social media. We can't turn a blind eye to mistakes that happen, like the WCK kitchen killings. I mean, these are all objectively bad things, and we can say, hey, you should have done that better. And that's my job as an analyst to do that. But if I genuinely thought Israel was committing genocide, I would say so. But all my analysis and my research leads me to think the opposite. But trying to take that line of balance, like, because I haven't come down 100% on the Palestinian side, the level of abuse that I get publicly for trying to take a balanced line is astonishing, frankly. If I showed you my DMs on Twitter, it's
I don't want to see
brutal.
them.
I get called every name under the sun on a daily basis, and that's for being as objective as I can. Nobody can accept that you might take a different position to them. It must be malign. You must be getting paid by Netanyahu. Even though I publicly said I thought the war in Gaza should have ended in July, and I backed Yoav Gallant over Benjamin Netanyahu when when the defense minister was sacked. So, it takes a degree of balls to stand up and say these things publicly, and some people just don't have that. It's much easier to go along with saying it's a genocide, aren't Israel awful, which personally I don't think is fair, and I wouldn't do. Um, and I think that that's got to play into it. The sheer point and screech tactics of the Western pro-Palestinian campaign is very, very effective.
Andrew, as someone who, when I was reading a little bit about biography about the fact that you were in Afghanistan combat, um, in the past year, we had I guess, year and more than a year at this point, the Afghanistan withdrawal of the Americans and the Taliban taking over. And we've been hearing since then about women. The new law is that they have to put certain shades even on all floors of the windows so that people cannot look inside if there happens to be a woman in the house. And obviously women can no longer go to school and all this kind of stuff. But one of the things that, at least in America, was talked about is that the withdrawal of Afghanistan, the way it was done, I think objectively bad way it was done,
Absolutely.
was one of the reasons why, first of all, Putin felt emboldened to go into Ukraine. That's at least the claim. I tend to agree with this. I just want to. And the second thing was October 7th, Donald Trump at least said this, and other people around him, Hamas would be a lot more hesitant of doing what it was doing because America was considered weak, and therefore its allies were weak too. Do you agree with that? That was also played also in Ukraine, but also in the Gaza situation?
Yeah, I do agree. And I think it's why it's so dangerous that Trump is forcing ceasefires on both Israel and Ukraine, because China will be watching, and they'll be watching in regards to Taiwan. And that's a much bigger deal, quite frankly, than either Ukraine or Israel in global
West,
terms, because that's World War III type stuff, if that goes as bad as it might. When it comes to the Afghan withdrawal, it was just a white flag. And I've got friends who deployed on the ground to Kabul airport, and that was my regiment when all 3 battalions deployed, which is the first time in a very long time that all 3 have gone on operations together. And it was a car crash, and the troops did an incredible job, but the politicians let them down, as they did the Afghans. It's heartbreaking to see, and I think it does give a really clear message about backing your allies.
Yes.
When you ditch them like that, and when we couple it with what we're seeing from Russia, what we're seeing from Hamas, in terms of the way they attack our will to fight, because that's what they're doing with these information campaigns. Partly is they're attacking the Western will to fight. If you look at the Russian information ops on the MAGA constituency in America, convincing them that Ukrainians are all Nazis who are spending American tax dollars on buying yachts and houses and fur coats, whilst Americans pay $20 for a chicken at the supermarket. To anyone objectively looking in, it's absolutely insane, but it's worked. And Trump's voter base hate Ukraine. I've got an American friend who voted for Mr. Trump, and his exact words were "F Ukraine," because these information ops have been incredibly effective. And likewise, in terms of support for Israel, they've been incredibly effective in degrading that in Western societies. So when we couple that international weakness of insisting on de-escalation and ceasefires, when we couple that with the fact our own populations are under attack from malign actors, undermining our very will to go to fight, that's a really, really dangerous paradigm. And when it comes to Taiwan, you can expect that should China take any action, that's going to be accompanied with a flood of videos on TikTok talking about how China's justified and how America's committing war crimes in Taiwan, and all this stuff's coming our way if we show this weakness, which unfortunately it looks like Mr. Trump is going to when he takes over in a few days' time.
Yeah. And it's not like Joe Biden. It's a sort of progression of American administrations, starting, I think, probably from Obama in terms of like trying to de-escalate, leave the region. It seemed that Obama didn't want to like try getting out of the Middle East almost altogether and was pulled back in. His red line in Syria that just went totally ignored, and Putin took advantage of that at the time. And we've been progressing. We'll see where it goes from here. But like you said, it doesn't look good on the sense of deterrence, because your enemies need to think that you are willing to use power if push comes to shove, and if they think you're unwilling to do so, they'll take advantage of it. So, like you said, the information wars is working on weakening the resolve of inside, and then pressuring politicians to not do anything when allies or even American or British interests are actually themselves hit sometimes.
Yeah, and there's active subversion as well. I mean, look at the guy who negotiated Obama's Iranian nuclear deal, Robert
Yes.
Malley. He's now suspended because they think he might be an Iranian agent, and he was Biden's envoy to Iran as well. I mean, our enemies know what they're doing. They know what they're doing, and they're playing a very, very clever and sophisticated game that we are absolutely not countering at all.
Yes.
And that's if we're even, our policymakers are even aware it's happening. But it's very clear from an analyst perspective that this is some serious stuff, and we are absolutely not on top of it. And it really worries me. Really worries me.
Yes. Andrew, you're based in England. You were a soldier in the British Army. And my question is about two things. Number one, the British Israeli relationship, let's say. It seems that it's been deteriorated, obviously, under this new government, which came in saying even before it came in that it was very critical of what Israel was doing. And then the foreign secretary, I think it's called in your country, said, stopped some of the defense companies from selling things to Israel. I think it was more, I don't think you guys really sell really important stuff to Israel in terms of its weapons, but just ceremoniously, so to speak, it meant was another, brick or nail in the coffin, so to speak, on these types of things. Where do you think we're going in terms of our relationship with each other here?
Yeah, it's been frustrating to see. And I think for really important context, when we had a general election, there were 4 seats that the Labour Party lost to Gaza candidates in heavily Muslim constituencies.
What does it mean, Gaza candidates?
So they ran on a Save Gaza ticket, and they won the seats based on one sole issue, that was Gaza. That's the power of this information campaign. We've now got 4, and then another independent joined them, Jeremy Corbyn. So we have 5 MPs in the House of Commons who are elected solely to represent Gaza. It's absolutely baffling.
I don't understand. Wait, I know this is like weird, but it's like they're members of parliament representing a certain district in terms that we can understand, and they're supposed to officially help that district represent it, and the only thing they're there for is Gaza.
Yeah, you got it. So you've got the Labour Party, Conservative Party, Liberal Democrats, and then a few other smaller parties. These guys ran as independents for Gaza, and they got elected on that. So we have 5 MPs in our House who were elected on the sole issue of Israel's quote-unquote genocide in Gaza. And the party...
What do they do all day in the parliament? They just speak about Gaza?
Pretty much, yeah. They throw in resolutions. One of them spoke the other day about not banning marriage between cousins. So that was a real valuable piece of contribution to the UK's national debate. But that's the level we're talking about here. But yeah, they generally just put in loads of resolutions about how terrible Israel is, and everyone ignores them. But Labour is running slightly scared of that constituency. A few other MPs came very close to losing their seats in heavily Muslim-dominated areas, unfortunately. And as a result, their policy towards Israel has to be do the sort of the bare minimum that they can and claim to be being tough on Israel without actually blowing up the relationship completely. So endless calls for ceasefire immediately, regardless of any tactical considerations or strategic considerations. Stopping some arms sales to Israel, but actually they're meaningless in terms of actually affecting Israel's defense capability. They've, openly condemned various things Israel's done and refunded UNRWA and stopped their opposition to the ICC. So, that's the minimum they could really do and still claim to these people that they've lost as voters, that they're trying to win back, that they've done something about Israel. But all it's really done is just make Great Britain a complete irrelevance to this conflict. They've deleted every part of
Right.
influence I've had with the Netanyahu government. And actually, I had a meeting with Bibi in July where the foreign secretary's name came up, and Bibi just sort of smirked, and it was just embarrassing as a Brit, frankly, to see how poorly our government has mismanaged this situation. It was actually very depressing because, I think the Conservative government before that, for all their flaws, domestically had a pretty good war when it came to Israel. They were a solid ally, which is what I'd expect. And this just speaks to that weakness I've just discussed regarding Afghanistan and Ukraine. It just shows that our enemies can subvert us, and because our politicians are flapping about losing political power, they will turn on their allies just to shore up their domestic vote. It's an incredibly dangerous time.
But also, Andrew, I wanted to ask you, and this is a little bit different, but I think it also runs into this issue, is that the entire world right now is talking about two main things. It seems to be lately is the Trump coming into office next week, and this whole grooming thing in the UK. So
Yeah.
one of the members of Trump's top team, Elon Musk, is like, it's been one of his main things that usually, you don't usually talk as an American about what's happening domestically in the UK or vice versa. Maybe people talk about what's happening in America because it is America, but usually we don't get into like political disagreements about crime in different countries. But this, I think, is bigger than just crime, right? It's sort of like a cultural, it's part of the culture war in the sense that what we were just talking about. So people who have different moral values who come into a certain culture and try to subvert it from within. And so it seems to me, as I understand the story, is that maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most of these people who are grooming and assaulting sexually and otherwise young white girls, and usually poor white girls, are Pakistani Muslim men. And so, and it sort of, when I started reading it reminded me of Hamas on October 7th and the way that rape is used as a sort of even weapon against the disbelievers.
A mechanism of control almost.
Yeah.
It's a mucky issue. It's not getting a particularly balanced hearing, in the sense that there have been hundreds of convictions, and the police and the courts have worked hard to try and prosecute people. But I believe that there are huge numbers of people who've also got away with it. I believe that the reports of the police mishandling stuff is probably accurate. And of course, there's lots of arguments about the demographics of sexual offenders in the UK. But this particular crime, this particularly niche aspect of sexual crime, does appear to be majority Pakistani males. So, it's a really tricky one. Why Musk has blown it up is a really interesting one.
Yes.
Maybe he just thinks it's the right thing to do. Maybe he really dislikes the UK's government.
Could be all of the above.
Which frankly I sympathise with. But yeah, it's fascinating to see the way this is played out from a social media perspective, and that's not a comment on what's actually happened. It's a comment on the commentary. It's been.
Could I ask you one thing? Just interject and ask you on a principled level. The fact that I asked this of Melanie Phillips. I actually spoke to her today, and she lives now in Jerusalem. So we spoke our time. We don't have any time difference now. So one of the things that I asked her, and she didn't really have she said she's thinking about it. She doesn't know the right answer. Is how have we reached a tipping point in some of these European countries where the demographics have changed so much that they're unsavable? So what I mean is that in European countries people don't have a lot of kids. The replacement rate is very, very low. And so that's one of the reasons why a lot of immigrants are coming in, because the jobs are there. There's no local people that are being born to take the jobs. The welfare state needs young people who are working to pay in. And so a lot of these people that are coming in and they're taking more and more of the pie, so to speak, of the people, are people without the Western values, whether it's people from the Middle East, from the Far East, wherever. But they're not Western in the way they think of things, and assimilation is much harder because there's more of them. Usually you assimilate into the majority. But when you're already not so much of a minority, the question is whether you think the UK or other countries in the West, some of them at least, are gone. There's no way to save them anymore.
I mean, it's something I don't really have an answer to because it's not something I've really thought about. It's not my
Right.
area of study or area of expertise. So I'd be giving you nothing more than a sort of normal person on the streets reckon when it comes to my answer for this. Look, there are undeniably parts of the UK that are unrecognisable to how they were 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I personally find it quite strange walking down streets in London where the language is primarily Urdu on the road sign, on the shop fronts and such like, and where you are a colour minority. It's slightly weird and unsettling from just a purely human perspective. In your own capital city, that feels quite odd. Do I think that we're lost as a country? Probably not. I think that, frankly, the more we can bring affluence to the UK, the more people will be inclined to assimilate. And at the moment, we're in a really bad place economically. And until we fix that, then societal divisions, I think, in times of poverty, do tend to get amplified. So,
I agree.
That's something we need to work on is how we turn our country from an economic basket case into something that, where cultural divisions come very much secondary to the fact that everyone's happy and making a lot of money. Yeah? And we're a long way from that right now. So there's solutions to the situation. I wouldn't call it a problem necessarily. Certain areas
Challenge.
a challenge. Yeah, it's something we want to make. We want to make a happier country, a richer country, and a country where everyone is getting along. They don't have to be friends, but as long as they get along, I'm kind of relaxed with that. Hell, my family heritage is Welsh, and our country was invaded by the English, and our language was destroyed, and our culture was wrecked for a very long time. So this is a pattern that's happened in history before, and yet now we all get along reasonably well, except for when rugby comes around. So, there's migration is a human feature, and I think it all comes back down to, are people happy and prosperous? And if you can create those conditions, I think a lot of these problems go away.
I hope you're right. I have one last question that I think. Well, let's see what you have to say about it, because maybe it's not your expertise in terms of studies, but I think it's probably your life experience. So you've been in war zones in the past. You're a soldier. That was, I guess, your first profession, right? We can say that.
Pretty
And
much.
yeah, so a lot of soldiers are in Gaza, Lebanon, here, reservists, people with families. I have friends who have gone back and forth, come home for a month, go back for two. It's people have done hundreds of days of reserves already, some of the people, especially the officers. Some people have had babies born and they don't even know the babies really. So the babies don't know who their father is. And when they come back, the kids don't recognize them. It's really a difficult situation for a lot of people, especially now, not the ones who are in the conscripted. Those are young 18-year-olds. People are 30, 40-year-olds and still doing this. A lot of people will be coming home now, whenever the war ends, will be very traumatized. They're going to see, they've seen over the past year and a half, body parts being blown off, friends losing limbs, some of them friends dying in front of their own eyes. They're going to come back home to their families changed people. And I assume friends, or you even had experiences where people that had to face these types of challenges. What can you tell the Israeli soldiers, especially the reservists, people with families who need them, people with jobs, people with companies? What can they do to, what words of advice can you give them, I guess?
I mean, I can give you a very personal first-hand experience. I was medically retired from the British Army with PTSD from Afghanistan, so I've been around that boy, as it were. What would I say is, I think I'd speak more to their families first. I would say, keep an eye on your loved ones. Look for those kind of changes that you talked about, and it might be mood swings, it might be sleeplessness, it might be something more serious like flashbacks. These things might happen. Look for the things that set them off. Have a think what the triggers might be. I mean, I still jump at party poppers. If I'm at a Christmas party and someone lets off a party popper, I'll flinch. I was in my sitting room last night and someone fired a gun on TV and it made me jump because I wasn't expecting it. So these things will catch you out. and then try and get there early, I think, is probably the best thing. The best piece of advice is look out for these changes and then take action as soon as you notice them. Because they can deteriorate to a really serious situation where people, either do things that ruin their lives or they go as far as taking their own life. And that's really, the worst case scenario. It can take some time to realize that you need that help, though, which is why families are so important, and someone to say, hey, you're not yourself. Come on, let's go and talk to someone. But it can be really hard to get people to do that. But as long as people are kind of aware that it might happen to them, and awareness is such a huge thing. In decades gone by, we didn't know about this stuff, and it was written off as shell shock or battle shock or something similar. But it can happen. Help does exist. Help can be very effective when it comes, but you'll need your family support around you, and that can be really difficult because when you're, in a bad place with PTSD, you can be kind of an asshole.
And also, Andrew, would you say that it's important to not be ashamed to ask for help? Because I know people who it took them a long time to they felt it lesser of a person, lesser of a man. It made them cowards. It made them feel like they were weak because they felt. So I think it's important to say for both of us, just to give to the audience, or if they happen to be watching, just how it's the opposite. The fact that you're willing to admit that you need help, to take care of your problems, to be there for your family, because being someone who can't, who doesn't get the help, you're hurting your own family by not getting the help. So you're not being brave. Being brave means getting the help and taking care of yourself.
It's the old saying that you're stronger than your darkest day. It's the strength that comes from having that ability to say, do you know what, I'm not okay. Look, you can see over my shoulder just there, I've got a wall full of wings and medals and badges. But by far the hardest one, and the one I'm proudest of earning, is my own mental health. And, that's because it took a lot of hard work to say, I need help me. And then go through the process, which isn't easy either, because it involves facing up to your trauma and dealing with it and learning how to process it and cope with it. And I still have bad days, and it happens. But I'm a perfect living testament to the fact that you can go to war, you can see awful things, you can have a hard time at the end of it, but you can get it through the other side, and you can learn lessons and you can grow from that experience. But the first step is having the bravery and the courage to say that, actually, do you know what, I could do with a helping hand here. And that's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And anyone who does that has my eternal respect. And yeah, it's something I'm always happy to talk about. And my DMs on X are always open. If anyone does ever think that they need to reach out and just talk to someone who understands, DMs are there. Go for it.
And also, people don't have X, because most people, it's very weird we talk about X, but most people still don't have X. It's like all the people who think they're important are there, or people who, so it's like, but people who are in war, a lot of times, they'll have WhatsApp but nothing else, and they're fine with it. People who have real jobs and not their jobs of reading what other people have to say. So if anyone wants to maybe contact Andrew for them, or send me a message and I'll send to Andrew, or whatever needs, feel free. And questions, anything, I'll forward to Andrew and we'll answer the best ones. And if anyone wants advice, etc., like Andrew just said, obviously I'll get in touch and we'll make the connection. But I want to say that just the fact that you're able to talk like that is something that I was touched just now. So thank you so much. I think the whole conversation at the end of the day was worth it just for that, because that's more important than all we just spoke about. Most of the stuff we spoke about, we don't really have control over. We could give our opinions. We could say what we think should happen. We could say how, crazy a lot of this stuff is. We have sort of influence on maybe people who are listening to us and somehow get to the policymakers. But we do have that one person, that two people need that advice, need to hear your testament. And so I'm so grateful for you for doing that. So thank you so much, Andrew.
Pleasure.
And it was a pleasure talking to you. And obviously, guys, so Andrew is I told Andrew before he came on how much I appreciate his stuff, and I think you could understand why. So thank you so much for watching us. And like I said, send your messages to me. We'll forward it to him, and we'll see you on our next episode. So thank you so much, guys, for watching, and keep in touch. Thanks for tuning in to the Western Spirit Podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. See you next time.